Aurora Bennett's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might leap out of her chest as she stood before the towering glass doors of the five-star Callaway Hotel, her trembling fingers gripping a neatly folded resume that now felt heavier than her entire future. The marble floors inside gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting a world she didn't belong to, a world of wealth, power, and people who would never understand the quiet girl from a modest town. She inhaled sharply, whispering a silent prayer for courage. Yet her legs felt unsteady as she followed the directions given to her, her anxiety twisting her thoughts into knots until she couldn't even read the numbers on the golden plaques outside the rooms. The hallway smelled faintly of roses and expensive cologne, an intimidating reminder of who she was about to meet. The man everyone described as ruthless, brilliant, and impossibly handsome, Ethan Callaway, the CEO whose signature alone could change lives. Her palms were damp, and in her panic she pushed open a polished wooden door without thinking, stepping into a breathtaking suite bathed in morning light and silence, the air thick with the scent of fresh linen and something faintly masculine. For a moment she froze, her eyes sweeping across luxurious leather sofas, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city skyline, and the faint sound of dripping water coming from an adjoining room. Only then did the reality hit her that she might not be where she was supposed to be. Before she could retreat, a deep male voice, low and unexpectedly warm, cut through the silence. "Who are you?" And she turned, mortified to see him. Ethan Callaway himself, standing barefoot with damp hair clinging to his forehead, a towel draped loosely around his neck, his blue eyes sharp yet startlingly curious as they met hers. Every nerve in Aurora's body screamed for her to flee. But her legs refused to move, leaving her trapped in the intensity of his gaze as her lips fumbled out a whisper. I'm sorry, this is the wrong room." Her words collapsing beneath the weight of embarrassment. Ethan, known for his ice-cold demeanor in boardrooms, felt something stir inside him at the sight of this trembling girl who couldn't meet his eyes yet radiated an unspoken sincerity, a rare softness in a world filled with pretense. Rather than anger, a small amused smile curved his lips, surprising even himself as he studied her flushed cheeks, the way she clutched the resume to her chest like a shield. "You're not here to seduce me, are you?" he teased lightly, his tone playful but gentle, watching her eyes widen in horror at the absurd suggestion, her head shaking furiously as she stammered apologies he didn't need. "Relax," he murmured, his voice dropping into something almost kind. "You just walked into the wrong place. Happens to everyone." Though in truth, no one had ever dared to walk into his private suite uninvited, and no one had ever left such an impression in a mere heartbeat. Aurora's breath caught, her shame battling an odd flutter in her chest she couldn't explain, a pull toward the stranger who was supposed to intimidate her but instead made her feel seen, if only for a fleeting second. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward but charged, as though the universe itself paused to witness this accidental meeting. Ethan's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, catching details he shouldn't notice. The frayed strap of her handbag, the faint tremor in her hands, the vulnerability in her eyes that contrasted so starkly with the women he was used to, women who chased wealth rather than sincerity. Aurora finally found the strength to step backward, muttering a final apology before bolting out the door, her heels clicking frantical. Lie down the hallway, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Ethan stood frozen in the quiet aftermath, towel forgotten, heart strangely unsettled as he replayed her wide, honest eyes in his mind. Eyes that didn't want his fortune, only forgiveness for a mistake. For reasons he couldn't yet name, he didn't want to forget her. He didn't even know her name. Yet the memory of that trembling voice and those hazel eyes clung to him like a ghost he wouldn't escape. He didn't know it yet, but that wrong room was about to change everything. Unraveling secrets, breaking barriers, and igniting a love story neither of them had dared to dream of. Aurora's pulse hadn't slowed since that humiliating morning in the wrong suite. But days later, her life tilted again when an email arrived with the Callaway Enterprises seal. She had somehow been hired. Disbelief clung to her as she stepped into the towering skyscraper, its mirrored walls reflecting her nervous figure among the polished chaos of executives rushing past. She clutched her orientation folder, praying no one would recognize her, unaware that fate had already decided otherwise. The elevator ride to the 35th floor felt endless, her heart hammering harder with each floor ding until the doors opened and she froze. Ethan Callaway stood at the far end of the hallway, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, talking to board members, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. Their eyes met briefly, his blue gaze sparking with recognition, a fleeting smirk tugging at his lips as if the universe had just handed him a private joke. By the time she entered his office later, her composure had already frayed, and when he casually remarked, "No wrong rooms today, I hope?" her cheeks flushed crimson, the memory of that morning burning anew. His teasing was light, yet it carried something deeper. Curiosity, maybe even admiration, though she couldn't allow herself to believe it. As days passed, she discovered he wasn't the monster the tabloids painted. He was demanding yet fair, cold in meetings, yet unexpectedly gentle when no one was looking. Still, whispers of disapproval followed her. Icy glares from coworkers loyal to Vivian Calloway, the woman Ethan's mother had all but chosen as his future bride. Vivian's name echoed through hallways like a ghost. Elegant, ruthless, and everything Aurora wasn't. Margaret Calloway's disapproval was sharper, subtle at first in tight-lipped stares but quickly escalating to veiled warnings that Aurora didn't belong in their world. Back home, Nate noticed Aurora's growing distraction and pressed for answers, his protective instincts flaring when he learned she worked under Ethan. The Calloways, he reminded her bitterly, had destroyed their family once before. Aurora, caught between loyalty to her brother and a confusing pull toward her boss, tried to bury her feelings. Yet every accidental brush of Ethan's hand or lingering glance in crowded rooms unraveled her resolve. Ethan, despite himself, felt his walls cracking. Late nights reviewing reports became excuses to keep her near, to hear her soft voice read numbers aloud, to watch her brows furrow in concentration. But beneath this quiet attraction lay secrets Ethan feared would shatter her trust, past betrayals, broken engagements, and scars left by Vivian's deceit. Meanwhile, Vivian's return to the city sent ripples through the company, her arrival at a shareholders' dinner igniting whispers of reconciliation as she slipped into Ethan's side with practiced grace, her arm brushing his just enough to make Aurora's stomach twist. Ethan noticed Aurora's sudden silence, her eyes darting away, and for the first time in years he hated the games wealth demanded. Tension thickened when Margaret cornered Aurora in the hallway, voice honeyed yet sharp, suggesting she choose on jobs within her league, words that stung worse than outright insults. That night, Aurora sat on her fire escape staring at city lights, torn between quitting and staying, torn between protecting her heart and risking it. Across town, Ethan lay awake in his penthouse, replaying her expression when Vivian touched him, realizing with startling clarity that the wrong room wasn't an accident at all. It was destiny knocking twice, and this time, he couldn't let her slip away. Aurora never expected quiet nights in the office to become the highlight of her week, yet there she was, staying late under the soft hum of city lights, typing beside the man whose very presence once terrified her, their silence oddly comforting. Ethan rarely spoke during these moments, but every stolen glance, every unspoken word in the air, felt louder than any confession. She noticed the smallest things. How he removed his watch at exactly 9 p.m. How his fingers tapped the desk when he was lost in thought. How exhaustion softened his sharp features into something almost boyish. Ethan, in turn, found himself drawn to her humility, the way she thanked the janitors by name, the way she smiled shyly when he offered her coffee, as though kindness from him was unexpected. Late car rides became a ritual, him driving her home in his sleek black sedan, jazz music low, city lights flickering through tinted windows, while their hearts spoke a language neither dared to voice. It was in those silences that something unnameable bloomed, a fragile thread pulling them closer despite the chaos brewing around them. That chaos found form in Vivian, whose return to Calloway Enterprises came with sharp heels and sharper intentions, her laughter too sweet, her eyes always landing on Aurora with a predator's precision. The corporate gala was Vivian's stage, chandeliers glittering, champagne flowing, cameras flashing, and Aurora, though Dr. Est modestly in borrowed silk, felt painfully out of place amid the opulence. Ethan arrived late, his presence electrifying the room, but his first glance sought Aurora, not Vivian, a fact Vivian noticed instantly. Bitterness coiled in her chest as she executed her cruel plan. A subtle accident, a tilt of her wrist, and a glass of crimson wine cascaded onto Aurora's pale dress. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Vivian's feigned apology dripped with mockery, her words cutting deeper than the stain. "Oh dear, silk is so hard to clean when it's not custom-made, isn't it?" Aurora froze, mortification burning her skin, her humble roots laid bare before a sea of judgmental eyes. Before she could flee, a weight settled on her shoulders. Ethan's suit jacket, warm and protective, his silent gesture louder than any defense. No speech, no confrontation, just quiet loyalty that made the entire ballroom hold its breath. Vivian's smirk faltered as whispers spread. The powerful CEO choosing the shy assistant over the socialite. Aurora excused herself, tears threatening to spill as she hurried to the restroom, gripping the marble sink as sobs she'd been holding back for weeks finally broke free. In that mirror, she didn't see an assistant or a mistake. She saw someone caught between two worlds, terrified of falling in love with a man she could never truly have. When she emerged, mascara barely dry, Ethan was waiting outside the door, leaning against the wall with that unreadable gaze that somehow made her feel both safe and vulnerable. He didn't ask if she was okay. He already knew. Instead, he simply walked beside her back into the gala, silent but steady. And in that silence, she realized something dangerous. She was falling for him, not in loud declarations or fiery passion, but in the quiet moments that stitched themselves into her heart without permission. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both felt it. The shift, the pull, the inevitability. As the music swelled and the world around them faded into a hush only they could hear. The gala's echoes still lingered in Aurora's ears days later, yet the silence that followed was heavier than applause. Behind polished office doors and city lights, unspoken truths began to stir. Whispers of Ethan's past, fragments of conversations she was never meant to hear. It happened one late evening as she returned to retrieve forgotten files. Hushed voices bleeding through half-open boardroom doors. Vivian's laugh sharp as glass as she purred about the man she betrayed and the rival she chose over him. Words that sliced through Aurora's chest like cold wind. Stunned, she stood frozen in the hallway, piecing together a truth Ethan had buried deep, a betrayal that explained the guarded way he loved, the walls behind his blue eyes. Pity wasn't the right word for what she felt. It was deeper, a quiet ache to reach into his scars and prove not everyone would abandon him. Yet before she could speak to him, another storm gathered. Margaret Calloway's calculated disdain finally taking shape when she summoned Aurora into her private study, the walls lined with oil portraits of Calloway ancestors glaring down like silent judges. Margaret's voice was smooth, controlled, but every syllable dripped with venom as she slid an envelope across the mahogany desk, thick with bills that smelled of insult rather than generosity. "Take this," she said coldly, "and disappear before you ruin him." As though Aurora's love were a contagion rather than salvation. Humiliation and fury warred in Aurora's chest, her fingers trembling as she pushed the envelope back untouched, her voice steady but trembling with resolve. "I'm not here for his money, and I won't leave him for yours." The shock that flickered across Margaret's face was brief but telling. She hadn't expected defos. Iance from the quiet girl she'd underestimated. Tension thickened in the air like an approaching storm, and by the time Ethan walked in, his mother's sharp tone and Aurora's pale cheeks told him enough. What followed was not loud. It was worse, quiet steel in Ethan's voice as he told Margaret to never insult her again, his loyalty unmistakable and irrevocable. Margaret's mask cracked, fury flashing before she composed herself, retreating with a promise that this wasn't over. Later that night, Ethan found Aurora in the dim glow of the office terrace. The city sprawled beneath them like a sea of diamonds. Words felt inadequate, so he offered honesty instead. The story of Vivian, the love that turned to ash, the rival who nearly destroyed him, and the man he became after. Aurora listened in silence, every confession deepening her affection, not for the millionaire everyone saw, but for the scarred soul beneath. "You deserved better," she whispered finally, and though Ethan didn't say it, his eyes replied, "So do you." In that moment, a shift occurred. An unspoken promise forged in pain and quiet resilience, two hearts bruised yet daring to believe again. But somewhere in the shadows, Vivian watched from a distance, her jealousy ignited, while Margaret plotted her next move. Neither willing to surrender, even if love was about to rewrite every rule they'd ever known. The city lay quiet beneath them, 1,000 lights flickering like distant stars, yet none rivaled the glow of the rooftop Ethan had transformed. Fairy lights strung across steel beams, a small table draped in white linen, candles swaying softly in the evening breeze. Aurora stepped out hesitantly, her breath catching at the sight, the weight of the past week melting away in this unexpected sanctuary. Ethan stood waiting, no longer the untouchable CEO, but simply a man stripped of pretense, his blue eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You did this? For me?" she whispered, and his answering nod carried a vulnerability rarer than any words. Dinner passed in hushed laughter, stolen glances, and the kind of silence that spoke more than conversation. The silence of comfort, not distance. When the last candle burned low, Ethan rose and walked to the edge of the rooftop, the wind ruffling his hair as he stared at the city he'd conquered but never truly belonged to. "Aurora," he said quietly, voice heavy with truths long buried. "You're the first person to make me believe love isn't a transaction." Her heart clenched at the raw honesty in his confession. A man who had everything yet felt empty until her. Gathering courage she didn't know she had, Aurora stepped closer, her hands trembling as she admitted what she'd never told anyone. "I've never been with anyone before. I don't even know if I know how to love right." For a heartbeat, fear flickered in her hazel eyes. Fear of being judged, of being seen as less. But Ethan's gaze held only reverence as he cupped her face gently, whispering, "Your worth isn't measured by your past, but by the way you make my present better." Tears she didn't expect welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming tenderness in his voice. The night air stilled, the hum of the city fading into nothing as he leaned closer, their foreheads touching in fragile intimacy, breaths mingling like promises too sacred to speak aloud. When their lips finally met, it wasn't fire but something deeper. A kiss slow and reverent, sealing unspoken vows rather than igniting fleeting passion. In that instant, the rooftop, the city, the entire world dissolved into silence. And yet her heart screamed his name so loudly she swore he must hear it too. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. Words felt too small for what had just shifted between them. Instead, they stood hand in hand. And beneath the stars, two souls scarred but healing, finally daring to hope that love, real, unconditional love, might just be worth the risk. Aurora descended from the rooftop the next morning, still carrying the echo of Ethan's kiss in her chest, unaware that by sundown her world would unravel in ways she could never prepare for. The elevator ride felt endless, every floor a reminder that reality waited below the stars, yet for the first time, she didn't dread it. Not until she stepped into the boardroom and saw the storm in Margaret Calloway's eyes, cold and cutting like winter steel. Executives sat stiffly along the gleaming mahogany table, whispers silenced by the matriarch's presence, and Aurora felt the shift in the air, a predator circling prey. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried sharper edges when spoken softly. "Tell me, Miss Bennett, do you truly believe you belong here? Do you truly believe you belong with him?" The humiliation was instant, heat crawling up Aurora's neck as judgmental eyes bore into her, her fingers tightening around her notepad until her knuckles turned white. Ethan sat at the head of the table, muscles tense, jaw locked, blue eyes flashing with silent fury at his mother's cruelty. "Mother," he warned. But Margaret's gaze never left Aurora, her disdain like a scalpel slicing open every insecurity she had fought to bury. "This family built an empire," Margaret continued. "And empires are not handed to charity cases who stumble into the wrong room." The words struck harder than any slap, louder than the ticking clock on the wall, louder than the frantic pounding of Aurora's own heart. Around her, murmurs rippled. Pity from some, disdain from others. Yet no one dared to intervene. Aurora's lips parted, desperate to speak, but her voice caught in her throat, silenced by the weight of shame. Then, without warning, the doors burst open, slamming against the walls with a force that startled even Margaret. Nate Bennett stormed into the room, eyes blazing, voice raw from years of swallowed rage. "Do you know what your family did to ours?" The words hung heavy in the air, confusion flashing across Ethan's face, curiosity sparking in the stunned silence. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, though part of him already knew. The resemblance to Aurora was undeniable. "I'm her brother," Nate spat, his finger jabbing toward Ethan with trembling fury. "And your family destroyed us." Aurora froze, shock anchoring her feet to the ground as every eye turned toward her, the weight of her brother's pain crashing into her chest. "Dad's company," Nate continued, voice breaking. "His entire life's work, gone because of Calloway greed. And we were left to pick up the pieces." Gasps erupted from the board members, scandal thickening the air like smoke, and Aurora's gaze darted helplessly between Ethan and Nate, love and loyalty tearing her apart. Ethan's brows knitted in confusion, his voice rising in defense. "I didn't know. I wasn't part of that deal." "You carry their name," Nate shot back, bitterness sharpening every word. "And she deserves to know the truth." Aurora's breath came shallow, chest tightening as betrayal, real or imagined, seeped into the cracks of her fragile hope. Before she could process, another voice, smooth and venomous, sliced through the tension. Oh, what a family reunion. How touching. Heads turned as Vivian Calloway glided into the room, every step a performance, her crimson dress clinging like a warning, her smile sweetened by malice. "Shall I add to the drama?" she cooed, eyes glinting with triumph as she sauntered to the center of the chaos. Margaret's lips curled into approval at Vivian's presence, recognizing an ally in cruelty. Ethan stiffened, dread churning in his stomach, knowing nothing good ever followed Vivian's theatrics. "Since everyone's here," Vivian purred, feigning innocence, "I might as well share my news." Silence thickened, anticipation and dread coiling like serpents. Then she placed a manicured hand delicately over her flat stomach and dropped the lie like a bomb. "I'm pregnant, and Ethan is the father." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shocked stares, and in the middle of it all, Aurora felt her world collapse in slow motion, the echo of last night's kiss turning to ash. Her eyes snapped to Ethan, desperate for denial, for reassurance, for anything. But all she found was his stunned silence. And silence in that moment felt like confession. Her throat tightened, breath hitching as tears pricked her eyes, humiliation and heartbreak colliding in a single devastating blow. She backed away, stumbling slightly, the walls closing in as whispers swirled around her like vultures. Ethan finally found his voice. "Aurora, wait. It's not what you think." But his words were drowned out by Vivian's smug laughter and Margaret's approving nod. Aurora turned and fled, her heels echoing down the marble corridor like war drums, each step heavier than the last. She burst through the glass doors into the storm outside, rain pelting her skin, mingling with tears she could no longer hold back. Ethan chased her, calling her name, but every syllable tore her deeper apart. How could she listen when every fear she'd ever buried screamed louder than his voice? She reached the sidewalk, soaked and trembling, staring blankly at the blur of headlights and neon lights, the world spinning too fast to anchor herself. Behind her, Ethan stopped at the threshold, rain soaking his tailored suit, fists clenched at his sides, torn between fury at Vivian's lie and despair at Aurora's belief in it. Vivian stood at the boardroom window, smirk widening as she watched Aurora run, savoring victory like fine wine. Margaret, satisfied, mistook her son's silence for surrender, blind to the storm she had unleashed in his heart. Nate followed Aurora out into the rain, protective anger radiating from him as he swore under his breath never to let her near the Callaways again. Inside, chaos brewed, board members whispering, alliances shifting, the scandal already taking root like poison ivy. Ethan's mind raced, rage boiling in his veins, at Vivian's manipulation, at his mother's cruelty, at his own failure to protect the only woman who had ever seen him beyond his name. The rain fell harder, drumming against the city like war cries, as Aurora disappeared into the crowd, her silhouette swallowed by the night. Ethan whispered her name into the storm, the sound ripped from his chest, a prayer and a plea in one breath. The silence that followed was louder than any scream, a silence thick with heartbreak and unfinished truths. And in that silence, as thunder rolled above and lies festered below, love hung by a thread, fragile, fraying, yet unbroken, waiting for the reckoning yet to come. Rain still hammered the city streets as Ethan stood motionless at the glass doors of Callaway Enterprises, watching Aurora's figure vanish into the storm, her absence carving an ache into his chest, so deep it felt almost physical. Behind him, chaos buzzed, board members whispering about scandal, Vivian smirking in hollow triumph, Margaret pretending composure while her empire trembled beneath her heels. But Ethan heard none of it, his mind consumed by the image of Aurora's tear-streaked face and the single devastating question burning in his heart. How do I fix this? For hours he searched the city, soaked to the bone, replaying every cruel word, every lie, every moment he failed to shield her from the storm his family created. Sleepless nights followed, and with them, determination. If Vivian's claim of pregnancy was true, he would take responsibility. But if it was another manipulation, he would expose it too. Oh, thoroughly the world would never doubt Aurora again. Quietly, without fanfare, he ordered the DNA test, his hands shaking as he delivered the legal documents to ensure no escape from truth. Days later, the results arrived. Stark, undeniable, negative. Vivian's lie unraveled in an instant, her desperate scheme collapsing like glass under a hammer. Rage burned in Ethan's veins as he strode into the boardroom unannounced, the results clenched in his fist like a verdict from the heavens. Margaret, mid-meeting, froze as her son slammed the papers onto the table, voice like thunder. Enough lies. Vivian was never pregnant, and this family owes Aurora Bennett more than we can ever repay. Gasps erupted, Vivian's painted smile faltering into horror as whispers spread through the room like wildfire. You think you can humiliate her and get away with it? Ethan's voice cracked, not with weakness but fury sharpened by love. Not anymore. If you cannot respect her, you will never see me again. Margaret rose, trembling, not with anger, but with the dawning fear of losing the son she thought she controlled. Ethan, she whispered, voice breaking for the first time, you can't mean that. I mean every word, he replied, blue eyes blazing, because for the first time in my life I've found something real, and I will burn this empire to the ground before I let you poison it. Vivian fled under the weight of her own disgrace, her power crumbling, while Margaret slumped into her chair, the steel in her eyes melting into something almost human. Regret. But there was no time to dwell on her silence because Ethan was already moving, heart pounding, searching for Aurora in the one place that felt inevitable. The hotel where they first met, the wrong door that had rewritten his entire existence. He found her there, same suite, same soft lighting, same trembling innocence, only now. Ow! Her eyes carried storms of heartbreak and love intertwined. Aurora turned as the door opened, shock flooding her face at the sight of him drenched and breathless. Why are you here? She whispered, voice fragile, bracing for more pain. Ethan stepped forward, words tumbling out between ragged breaths. Because I can't let you walk away thinking a lie was the truth. Vivian's claim was fake, I proved it, she's gone, and I'm done with everyone who ever tried to hurt you, even if they share my blood. Tears welled in Aurora's eyes, disbelief and relief warring in her trembling chest. Why? She asked softly, though she already knew the answer. Ethan's shoulders sagged as if every wall he ever built had crumbled, his next words barely audible yet carrying the weight of eternity. Because I love you. Silence hung, heavy, sacred. Before Ethan, the untouchable CEO, the man feared by boardrooms and envied by millions, sank to his knees before the shy girl who changed his life by accident. The world outside faded. No wealth, no titles, no grudges. Just a man on his knees, drenched in rain and devotion. His voice broke as he whispered the words that sealed their fates. The wrong door brought you into my life. And I never want the right one if it means losing you. Will you marry me? Aurora's breath hitched, tears spilling freely now as memories of every stolen glance, every quiet car ride, every silent defense flooded her. This wasn't the story she expected, but it was the love she had always deserved. Yes, she whispered, then louder, steadier. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes. He rose, gathering her into his arms as applause erupted from the doorway where Nate had been standing, silent witness to the man who had proven his love not through wealth but sacrifice. Nate stepped forward, eyes softening, the bitterness he carried dissolving into reluctant admiration. Take care of her, Nate murmured, voice gruff yet forgiving, or you'll answer to me. Ethan, no, dead solemnly, gratitude unspoken but understood. Margaret entered moments later, no longer the queen but simply a mother humbled, her apology halting yet sincere as she admitted, I was wrong. About her, about you, about everything. Aurora, gracious even in pain, offered forgiveness not for Margaret's sake, but for Ethan's healing. The Callaway Empire shifted that night, power bent not by money, but by love. As dawn broke, casting gold across the city skyline, Ethan and Aurora stood hand in hand on the same rooftop where their hearts first collided. No longer strangers but soulmates forged in fire and rain. Vows unspoken yet already written in every glance, every touch, every promise of forever that didn't need words. And as they kissed beneath the soft glow of morning, the world quieted, destiny humming softly around them. The story closed, not with grand fanfare, but with a golden truth whispered into eternity. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a mistake that feels like destiny.